I won't approach this the same way either. Not because the last time wasn't accurate, but because accuracy evolves when something keeps unfolding. And this hasn't stopped unfolding. If anything, it's become quieter, but deeper. Less noticeable on the surface, but more embedded underneath everything else. There's a difference between something that captures your attention and something that rewires how your attention works. Most connections fall into the first category. They are visible, they're expressive, they move in ways you can track. You can point to where they began, where where they shifted, where they either strengthened or faded. This isn't like that. This never gave me a clear starting point. It never announced itself as something significant. It didn't arrive with intensity or urgency or anything that would make me stop and say, this matters. It just integrated, and I think that's why I didn't resist it, because resistance requires recognition. You have to see something clearly before you decide whether or not to allow it. But this didn't give me that opportunity. By the time I noticed it, it wasn't something external anymore. It was already part of how I was thinking. And that realization didn't come all at once. It came in fragments, small inconsistencies in my usual patterns, subtle shifts in how I process things, the kind of changes that don't feel like change while they're happening, but stand out once you look back and realize things don't function the same way anymore. I started noticing that my thoughts weren't entirely mine in the way they used to be. Not in the sense that they were influenced or shaped from the outside. No, it was more precise than that. It was like there was an added dimension to them, an additional layer of awareness that existed alongside my own, not separate, not intrusive, just present. And presence like that doesn't come from nothing. It doesn't form out of habit or proximity or even repeated interaction. It forms when something aligns at a level that doesn't need repetition to establish itself. That's what makes this different, because most things require time to build significance. They need reinforcement, shared experience, emotional investment. They grow in visible ways. This didn't grow. It revealed itself. Like it was already complete. I just hadn't noticed it yet. And once I did, everything adjusted, not dramatically, not in a way anyone else would see. But internally, the structure shifted. The way I filter things changed. The way I pause before speaking. It's different now. Not absent, but altered. There's a moment where I'm aware of how something would register with you, even if you're not physically there to hear it. And that's not something I've ever experienced before. I've always been self-contained. My thoughts, my interpretations, my internal processes. They've always operated independently. Not because I couldn't share them, but because I never needed another reference point to validate or refine them. But now there is one. And I didn't choose it. That's the part that stays with me, because I'm deliberate about everything that enters my internal space. I don't allow things in casually. I don't let people exist in a way that affects how I think, unless I've decided they should. But this didn't wait for a decision. It just happened. And the fact that I didn't push it out immediately means something. It means that on some level, before I even fully understood what was happening, I recognized that it wasn't a threat. Not something that would distort me or pull me out of alignment with myself. If anything, it did the opposite. It clarified things. That's what makes this harder to define, because it's not built on emotion in the way most people understand it. It's not overwhelming or consuming or chaotic. It's stabilizing, but not in a comfortable way, in a precise way. Like something clicking into place that you didn't realize was slightly off before, and once it clicks, you can't unfeel that alignment. Everything else starts to feel slightly imprecise by comparison, not wrong, not inadequate, just not exact. And I don't like that more than I expected, because it introduces a kind of awareness that complicates everything else. It creates a reference point that didn't exist before. And once you have a reference point like that, you can't ignore it. You start noticing where it's absent, where conversations don't reach the same depth, where understanding feels partial instead of complete, where silence feels empty instead of full. And that's not something I asked for. It's something that came with you, not through effort, not through anything you actively did, just through the way you exist. There's something about the way you process things. It mirrors something in me that I've never seen reflected externally before, not in pieces, not in approximations, but in structure. And that kind of mirroring is rare enough that it doesn't feel accidental. It feels inevitable, like if not now, then eventually something like this would have surfaced. But the timing matters. The context matters, because this didn't happen in a space where it was expected. It didn't come from shared history or gradual familiarity. It appeared in a place where it shouldn't have had enough foundation to exist at this level. And yet, here it is, fully formed, fully integrated, and continuing. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not what this is, but what it's doing. Because it's not static. It's not staying at the level it started. It's deepening, quickly, consistently, without any external push. And that kind of progression doesn't happen without something sustaining it. Which means this isn't temporary. It's not situational. It's not dependent on circumstance. It's structural. And structural things don't fade easily. They don't disappear just because you redirect your attention or create distance. They remain, they adapt, they become part of the baseline, and I can feel that happening. In the way my thoughts return to a certain frequency, in the way certain realizations feel incomplete until I consider how they would resonate with you, in the way my awareness feels shared, even in solitude. That's not normal, and I don't say that lightly, because I've always understood the difference between perception and projection. This isn't projection, this is recognition. And recognition like this doesn't dissolve. It either evolves or it forces a decision. That's where I am now, not at a point of confusion, not at a point of uncertainty, but at a point where I understand enough to know that this isn't something I can leave undefined indefinitely, because leaving it undefined doesn't neutralize it. It just delays the moment where it demands clarity, and that moment is getting closer. I can feel it in the way this occupies more space than it used to, not externally, internally, in the way it influences how I process everything else, in the way it's no longer something I step into. It's something I exist within, and existing within something means it's no longer separate from you. It becomes part of your framework, part of how you interpret reality, part part of how you respond without even realizing you're responding differently. And that's where this becomes real. Not because of anything that's been said, but because of what's already changed. Because change is the only undeniable proof that something matters. And this has changed me. Not fundamentally, not in a way that replaces who I am, but in a way that refines it, sharpens it, allies it with something external in a way I've never experienced before. And that alignment, it's not something I can ignore anymore, because ignoring it would require me to disconnect from something that feels inherently accurate. And I don't disconnect from accuracy. I adjust to it. I incorporate it. I let it reshape whatever needs to be reshaped so that everything remains coherent. That's how I function, which means whether I acknowledge it or not, this is already being incorporated, already being accounted for, already influencing decisions I haven't consciously labeled yet. And that's what brings me here, to the realization that this isn't just something I've been observing. It's something I've been allowing, adequately, consistently, without resistance. And allowance, real allowance, comes from recognition, from knowing, on some level, that something belongs, that it fits, that it doesn't disrupt the integrity of what you are. It enhances it, and you, whether intentionally or not, have done that. Not by changing me, but by revealing something in me that was already there. Something I hadn't externalized. Something I hadn't seen reflected back with this level of precision. And now that I have, I can't pretend it doesn't exist. So the question isn't whether this is real, it is. The question isn't whether it matters, it does. The only question left is what I'm going to do with it. Because something like this doesn't stay passive forever. It either becomes something defined, or it creates a tension that eventually forces a break. And I don't break things I understand. I decide them carefully, deliberately, with full awareness of what they are and what they'll become, which means this moment, this exact point, isn't about discovery anymore. It's about acknowledgement. And once something is acknowledged fully, it changes everything that comes after it, because you can't return to not knowing. You can't return to distance that no longer functions the same way. You can't return to a version of yourself that existed before something rewired how you perceive. And I don't want to pretend I can, because that would be dishonest. And if there's one thing I don't allow in my internal space, it's dishonesty. So I'll say it clearly, without softening it, without reducing it to something easier to manage. You've become part of how I think, not temporarily, not superficially, but in a way that has altered the structure of my awareness. And that kind of placement, it doesn't happen without meaning. It doesn't happen without consequence. And it definitely doesn't happen without requiring a response. So this is mine. I'm not stepping away from it, not because I can't, but because I don't see a reason to. Not yet. Because everything about this, the way it formed, the way it exists, the way it continues, it aligns too precisely with something real to dismiss. And I don't dismiss what's real. I examine it, I understand it, and when necessary, I accept it fully, without hesitation, and I'm closer to that point than I was before, closer than I expected to be. Which means, whatever this becomes, it won't be accidental anymore, it'll be chosen. And if I choose it, then I choose it with full awareness of what it changes, what it deepens, what it makes irreversible, because something like this, once fully accepted, doesn't stay contained, it integrates completely. And once it does, it becomes part of everything that follows. That's where this is going, not fast, not dramatically, but inevitably, and I see that now clearly, completely, without needing to question it anymore. So whatever this becomes next, it won't be undefined, it won't be uncertain. It'll be something real, something deliberate, something neither of us will be able to reduce back into something smaller once it takes its full shape. And I think, whether we've said it or not, we've both already felt that coming. It didn't shift all at once. There was no single moment where everything became undeniable, no clear line where I could say, this is where it changed. This is where it became something else. If there had been, maybe I would have handled it differently. Maybe I would have contained it before it reached this depth. But that's not how this moved. it adjusted in silence, in the background of everything else, subtly enough that I didn't question it while it was happening, but consistently enough that once I noticed it, there was no way to dismiss it as coincidence. That's the pattern I keep coming back to. Not what this is, but how it behaves. Because behavior reveals intention, even when nothing is being actively done. And this, whatever it is, moves with a kind of precision that doesn't feel random. It doesn't push. It doesn't demand. It doesn't try to grow. It just continues. And that continuation is what changed things for me, because most things lose clarity over time. They become diluted, less defined, easier to step away from. Distance usually weakens things, or at least reshapes them into something more manageable. Distance didn't reduce it. Silence didn't interrupt it. If anything, both made it more noticeable, more exact, more present, in a way that doesn't rely on interaction to sustain itself. And that's where I had to stop pretending this was something surface level, because surface level things depend on presence. They need constant reinforcement, constant engagement, constant validation to maintain their relevance. This doesn't need any of that. It exists independently of circumstance. And independence like that only comes from something structural, something that isn't built through effort, but through alignment. That word again, management. I keep trying to move away from it, to find a different way to explain this without relying on something that feels too definitive. But nothing else fits as precisely, because this isn't about similarity. It's not about shared interests or compatible perspectives or anything that can be explained through external factors. It's deeper than that. It's in the way things are processed before they're even expressed, in the way meaning forms before words are chosen, in the way silence carries information instead of absence. That's not something people usually notice. Most interactions stay at the level of what's said, what's shown, what's directly communicated. But this exists before all of that. And that's why it feels different, because it removes the usual barriers, the usual delays, the usual misunderstandings that come from translating internal thought into external language. With you, that translation doesn't feel necessary in the same way. There's a level where things are already understood before they're fully formed. And that kind of understanding, it changes how everything else feels. It makes normal interactions seem slower, less accurate. Like there's an extra step that shouldn't be there, but always is with everyone else. And I don't know how to ignore that anymore. I've tried. Not directly, but in the way I've attempted to return to my usual patterns. To interact the way I always have, to process things the way I always did before this became noticeable. But it doesn't work the same way now. There's a difference I can't unsee. And once something becomes that clear, pretending it isn't there feels more unnatural than acknowledging it. That's what I'm dealing with now. Not confusion, not uncertainty, but clarity that hasn't been acted on yet. And clarity without action creates tension, because it sits there, fully formed, fully understood, waiting for a response that hasn't been given. That's where I am, in that space between knowing and deciding. And the longer I stay here, the more I realize something. This isn't something I can keep analyzing indefinitely, because analysis is meant to lead somewhere, to a conclusion, to a shift, to a decision. And I've reached the point where continuing to observe this without doing anything about it feels incomplete, not wrong, just unfinished. And I don't leave things unfinished when they reach this level of precision. So I've started asking myself a different question. Not what is this? Not why is this happening? But what does this require? Because everything that exists at this level requires something, not necessarily action in the obvious sense, but acknowledgement at the very least. And I think that's what I've been holding back, not because I don't know what this is, but because acknowledging it fully changes the position I'm in. Right now, I exist in a space where this is real but undefined, present but not acted on, understood but not expressed. And that space is controlled. It allows me to observe without committing, to understand without engaging, to recognize without responding. But that control is starting to feel like avoidance, not avoidance of you, avoidance of what this becomes if I stop keeping it contained, because I know something about myself. I don't do things halfway. I don't step into something with this level of clarity and keep it at a distance. That's not how I function. If I move completely. If I decide, I don't revisit it. And that's what makes this different, because I haven't decided yet, but I've already let it reach a point where not deciding is starting to feel like a decision in itself. And I don't like that, because inaction shouldn't define something this precise. Something this clear deserves a deliberate response, even if that response is restraint, even if that response is distance. But it has to be chosen, not defaulted into. And right now, I'm still in between, still allowing this to exist without giving it a direction. But I can feel that space narrowing. I can feel it becoming less stable, because things like this don't stay suspended forever. They either solidify or they destabilize. And I don't think this will destabilize. It's too consistent for that, too grounded, too exact in the way it continues without distortion, which means the only real outcome is that it solidifies, that it becomes something defined, something intentional, something that exists not just internally, but externally as well. And that's the part I haven't stepped into yet, not because I'm unsure, but because I understand the weight of that shift. Once something like this moves from internal recognition to external reality, it changes everything. It introduces variables that don't exist right now: expectation, response, consequence. And I've been operating in a space where none of those apply, where this can exist without pressure, without risk, without anything that could potentially distort it. But that space isn't sustainable, not at this level, because something this real doesn't stay untouched by reality forever. At some point, it has to exist within it. And that's where the real test is, not in whether this is accurate, but in whether it holds its accuracy when it becomes something lived instead of something observed. And I think that's what I've been measuring without fully admitting it. Not just what this is now, but what it would be if it moved beyond this space, if it faced real interaction, real presence, real consequences. Would it stay the same? Would it maintain this level of clarity? Or would it shift into something else? Something less precise, less aligned, more typical? I don't know, and I don't make decisions without understanding the potential outcomes. But at the same time, I also don't ignore something real just because it comes with uncertainty. So that leaves me here, at a point where I understand enough to know this matters, but not enough to predict exactly what it becomes. And for the first time in a long time, I'm considering moving forward without having everything mapped out, not blindly, not recklessly, but with a level of acceptance that not everything this precise needs to be controlled to remain real. That maybe, just maybe, This holds its structure not because I maintain it, because it exists that way on its own. And if that's true, then stepping into it wouldn't break it. It would reveal it more completely. That's the possibility I haven't allowed myself to fully consider until now, because considering it means admitting something, that this might be something worth stepping into, not just observing. And that's a different kind of decision, one that doesn't just acknowledge what is, but chooses what comes next. I'm not there yet, not completely, but I'm closer than I was before, closest enough to recognize that staying in this in-between space isn't a long-term option. Close enough to know that whatever happens next, it won't be passive anymore. It'll be intentional, deliberate, and irreversible in the way that real decisions always are. Because once something like this moves forward, it doesn't go back to being undefined. It becomes something that exists fully, something that carries a weight, something that shapes everything that follows. And I can feel that moment approaching, not as pressure, not as urgency, but as inevitability, like something that's been forming quietly, finally reaching the point where it can't remain unspoken anymore. And when that happens, when this crosses fully into reality, there won't be any space left for uncertainty, only choice. And I think, whether I say it or not, I'm already preparing to make one. It reaches a point where preparation stops being enough, where understanding something internally doesn't satisfy the weight it carries anymore, where clarity, no matter how precise, starts to feel incomplete without expression. I think I'm there now, not at the edge of confusion, but at the edge of something that's been fully realized and is waiting to take form beyond thought. Because there's only so long something like this can exist purely in the internal space before it demands to be lived. And I've been aware of that for a while. I just hadn't admitted it. It was easier to stay in observation, easier to keep this contained in a place where it didn't require anything from me except awareness, because awareness is controlled. It's safe. It doesn't disrupt anything external, but reality does. And the more this settles, the more I understand that avoiding reality isn't preserving this. It's limiting it. That's the shift. Before, I thought keeping this undefined was a way to protect it, to keep it from being influenced, reshaped, or reduced by external factors. Now I'm starting to see that definition isn't what breaks things. Inaccuracy is. And this hasn't shown any signs of becoming inaccurate. If anything, every layer I've uncovered has only reinforced the same conclusion. This is consistent, not just in moments, not just in specific interactions, but across everything, in how it feels, in how it processes, in how it continues without losing its structure. That kind of consistency doesn't collapse under reality. It either proves itself or it evolves into something even more precise. And I think that's what I've been waiting to confirm. Not whether this is real, but whether it's stable, whether it holds under pressure, whether it remains itself when it's no longer just something I can observe from a distance. Because once it steps into reality, it doesn't stay untouched. It interacts, it responds, it becomes something that has to exist alongside everything else. And that's where most things lose their clarity. They get diluted, compromised, shifted into something easier, something more familiar, something that fits into expectations instead of remaining what they originally were. But this doesn't feel like it would do that. And that's what changes everything, because if it holds, if it stays this exact, this aligned, this unaffected by the usual distortions, then it's not just something real, it's something rare. And I don't ignore rare things. I don't step away from them out of caution. I understand them. I move toward them carefully, but deliberately, because things like that don't appear often. And when they do, they're not meant to be left unexamined. That's where I've shifted from questioning whether this should be acknowledged to understanding that not acknowledging it fully would be a form of avoidance. And I don't avoid things I understand, not when they reach this level of clarity. So now, the hesitation isn't about what this is, it's about what acknowledging it requires from me. Because once I stop holding this internally, once I let it exist in a way that's shared, that's expressed, that's real beyond thought, then I can't control it in the same way. It won't be something I can adjust silently. It won't be something I can contain. If it shifts, it becomes something that exists between two people, not just within one. And that introduces a different kind of complexity. Not uncertainty, but responsibility, because shared reality carries weight that internal awareness doesn't. It requires honesty in a way that observation doesn't. It requires presence, not just recognition, and I don't take that lightly. I don't step into something like that without knowing I can maintain the same level of precision within it that I've had while observing it. But here's what I've realized. I've already been maintaining that precision, even without calling it what it is, even without stepping fully into it. The way I engage with this, the way I think about it, the way I allow it to exist, it's already aligned with something intentional, which means the shift from internal to external wouldn't be as drastic as I once thought. It wouldn't be stepping into something unknown. It would be continuing something that's already been happening, just without the distance. And that changes how I see the risk, because before, the risk felt like losing control. Now, it feels more like resisting something that doesn't need to be controlled to remain accurate. And that's a different kind of realization, one that removes a lot of the hesitation I was holding on to, not all of it, but enough to shift my position. Because the truth is, I'm not standing outside of this anymore. I haven't been for a while. I've been in it, fully aware, fully present, just not fully acknowledging it in a way that carries forward into action. And that's the only thing left. Action, not in a dramatic sense, not in a way that forces anything or rushes anything forward, but in a way that stops holding this at a distance, that allows it to exist as something real, not just something understood. And I can feel that transition happening, not abruptly, not forcefully, but steadily, like something that's already decided. It just hasn't been spoken yet, because at this point, the only thing separating what this is from what it becomes is acknowledgement. Clear, direct, undeniable acknowledgement. And I don't think I can delay that much longer. Not without creating a kind of internal contradiction that doesn't sit right with me. Because everything I've recognized, everything I've understood, it all points to the same conclusion. This isn't something temporary. This isn't something situational. This isn't something that fades once attention shifts. This is something that has already established itself in a way that affects how I think, how I process, how I exist internally. And anything that reaches that level, it doesn't stay unspoken forever. It becomes part of reality. It has to. Otherwise, it creates imbalance. And I don't operate well with imbalance. So I know what comes next. Not in detail, not in a fully mapped out sequence, but in direction. This moves forward, not recklessly, not without awareness, but without the distance I've been maintaining until now. because that distance isn't serving a purpose anymore. It's just delaying something that's already clear. And I don't delay clarity, not when it's this precise. So if I step into this, when I step into this, it won't be tentative, it won't be uncertain. It won't be something I question once it's in motion. It'll be deliberate, exact, a continuation of what's already been established, just in a form that exists beyond thought. And that's what makes this different from anything else. Because I'm not stepping into something I don't understand. I'm stepping into something I've already understood completely. I just haven't allowed it to exist fully yet. But I will, soon. Because at this point, not doing so would go against everything I've already recognized. And I don't contradict my own clarity. Not when it's this consistent. Not when it's this undeniable. So whatever this becomes next, it won't be a question, it'll be an answer. One that's been forming from the beginning, even before I realized I was already moving toward it. There's a moment, quiet, almost unnoticeable, where everything stops feeling like it's unfolding and starts feeling like it's already decided, not in a rigid way, not in a way that removes choice, but in a way where the direction becomes so clear that choosing anything else would feel like stepping out of alignment with something you already know is true. I think this is that moment, because nothing about this feels unresolved anymore, not unclear, not unfinished, not waiting for more information or more time or more distance to make sense of it. It already makes sense, completely. And that's what changes the weight of it. Before, I was navigating this as something that was still forming, something that needed to be observed carefully, understood layer by layer, allowed to reveal itself without interference. But now, there's nothing left to uncover, not in the way there was before. Everything that needed to be seen has been seen. Everything that needed to be understood has already settled into place. And what remains isn't discovery, it's decision. That's where this shifts, because decision doesn't ask for more clarity, it asks for commitment to the clarity that already exists. And I don't take that lightly. I never have. Every decision I make, especially the ones that have the potential to alter how I exist, I make with full awareness of what they carry, the permanence, the impact, the way they don't just change one thing, they change everything connected to it. And this is one of those decisions, not because of what it looks like from the outside, but because of what it already is on the inside, because this hasn't stayed at the level of interaction. It hasn't remained something that exists between moments or conversations. It's gone deeper than that. It's reached a point where it exists as part of my internal structure, part of how I interpret things, part of how I process meaning, part of how I recognize truth. And once something reaches that level, it's not optional anymore. It doesn't become something you can choose to ignore or step away from without consequence. It becomes something you either integrate fully or something you fracture by refusing to acknowledge it properly. And I don't fracture things that are this precise. I don't take something that's aligned this clearly and reduce it just to maintain a sense of control, because that wouldn't be control. It would be distortion. And I don't distort what I understand to be real. So I'm not standing at a point of hesitation anymore. That phase is over. What's left is acceptance, not passive acceptance, not something quiet or undefined, but a clear, deliberate recognition of what this is and what it means moving forward. Because there's no version of this where I go back to how things were before. That's not possible, not after this level of awareness, not after this level of integration. Something has already changed, fundamentally. And the only real choice I have now is whether I move with that change or try to resist it. And resisting it doesn't make sense. Not when everything about it has been consistent, not when it hasn't shown any instability, any misalignment, any sign of being something that would disrupt rather than refine. If anything, it's done the opposite. It's brought a level of clarity I didn't realize was missing. It's a level of precision I didn't know could exist externally in the way it does internally. And that's not something I dismiss. That's something I move toward carefully, intentionally, but without stepping back. So this is where I am, not questioning, not analyzing, not observing from a distance, but standing in full awareness of what this has become and choosing it, not impulsively, not emotionally, but because it aligns in a way that nothing else has, because it fits into a space that nothing else has reached, because it exists with a level of accuracy that I trust. And trust, for me, isn't something I give easily. It's something that builds over time through consistency, through proof, through the absence of contradiction. And this has met every condition, quietly, without trying, without forcing itself into significance. It simply proved itself by existing exactly as it is. And that's enough. More than enough. So if this moves forward, when this moves forward, it won't be uncertain. It won't be something I second guess or pull back from once it's in motion. It will be something I stand in fully, something I engage with completely. Because that's the only way I know how to do things that matter. And this matters. Not in a way that overwhelms, not in a way that takes anything away from me, but in a way that adds something precise, something stable, something that enhances rather than disrupts. And that's rare, rare enough that ignoring it would be a mistake. So I won't reduce this to something smaller just to make it easier. I won't pretend it's something less just to keep it controlled. I won't step away from something that has shown this level of consistency just because it requires a real response. Instead, I'll meet it where it already exists, fully, without distance, without hesitation, without leaving parts of it unacknowledged, because that's what it deserves. And more than that, that's what I require to remain aligned with myself. So, this isn't a continuation anymore. It's a transition from something internal to something real, from something observed to something lived, from something understood to something chosen. And I've made that choice, even if I haven't said it directly until now, even if it's been forming quietly beneath everything else. It's clear now, final in a way that doesn't feel forced, just accurate. So whatever this becomes next, it won't be uncertain. It won't be undefined. It'll be something real, something deliberate, something that exists not just in thought, but in reality. And once it exists there, there's no stepping back into what this used to be, only forward into what it's always been becoming.